So starting reasonably straightforward and starting with Caroline, just explain first of all, from your point of view, in 2025, what would you say are the areas of DVSA concern about operators generally? Where would you be focusing?
I think operators are split into different groups. So you've got the compliant, all of you here, the ones that are trying to do everything right, and we're here to help. But then we are using more and more technology because we've got the people who are trying to make bigger profits. They are really cheating the system. They are using technology to get around the system. Fraud is on the increase. And we have, if you have route mapping, people who are actually planning their routes around our check sites to avoid being seen. So we're putting an awful lot of effort into making sure we can stop and inspect vehicles wherever we see them. Do you want me to talk about?
Yeah, talk about Hades.
So this little machine here, this is our Hades. So this is an under-vehicle scanning machine. So if I just pop it down, one of my colleagues is going to drive it.
You could have pretended it was autonomous then.
Yes, I could. But as you can imagine, when you're on road checks, particularly as we're moving to where we do our road checks away from the fixed check sites where we don't have pits, we don't have ramps, there's a lot of vehicles you actually can't get underneath to see properly what's going on with the vehicle. So this little machine has cameras. The lights actually shine up when you're trying to take the pictures. So you can actually see what's going on underneath the vehicle. Now, they are evidence quality pictures. You know, these are not just some blurry little image. This is absolutely clear picture of exactly what there is. So when you're done here, please don't go until we're finished, but you will be able to go over to the stand and John and Leon will show you more about it. But it also has a heat camera on it. So this one is a brake, and you can see the heat camera showing it's nice and hot. Well, that would be a real problem if we were taking the pictures and looking and the brakes are cold. It shows the brakes aren't working, so it can go underneath. And lots of vehicles, for example, light goods vehicles, coaches, they're vehicles you can never get under unless you've actually got a pit. So this means that every vehicle on the road is accessible for us to see underneath the vehicle. If we wanted to look forward, one of the things we're hoping to do with this is it does have an AI capability. So it should learn what a vehicle should look like underneath, every different kind of vehicle. So we should get to the point where we're actually able to run it under a vehicle and it will tell us what's wrong with the vehicle. So it's something that will really help our examiners do a really robust inspection at the side of the road. We also have the remote tachograph scanning kit. So second generation smart tachographs, it can read it as it's going by. So there's lots of work that we are doing to make sure we can do a really robust check of a vehicle wherever it is on the network, and using all of the ANPR data we get. So we get over 80 million hits a day of vehicles. So we know where the people we want to target are, which roads they're working on, what contracts they're running. So we can make sure we're there to greet them and then do a really robust check. So what we're doing is ensuring that the people that are non-compliant are not getting a competitive advantage because we're able to move where they are and they can't avoid us.
So there to greet them. I quite like that phrase. Yeah, some greeting. So actually, just while we're on tachographs, it's probably a worthwhile thing to discuss momentarily. I've come across recently a focus on micro movements. These are movements which are below the threshold to record driving, but which occur while a driver is recording brake. Are you aware that that's a thing that's now being looked at?
It is a thing that is being looked at. We do have tolerances and we realise there are issues. And a lot of this comes down to what the driver actually explains, where they are, what they're doing. We are reasonable people. If there is a reasonable explanation for it, the explanation where it moved while they were taking their tachograph card out to put somebody else's in when they're driving on it, that doesn't quite work. But, you know, it's about the driver, and a lot of this, and when we come on to other things, it's about what people say. It's the conversation that happens. So if we come to visit as an operator a couple of weeks later and you say, oh, well, the driver was doing this, this and this, that's why there was a micro movement. Well, why didn't the driver tell us that at the time? You know, people must talk to us. If they don't talk to us at the time, then we will have to assume that it's something that they don't want to tell us about and look into it further.
Now, it's fair to say on micro movements that it's relatively new from an enforcement point of view. It's been known about as something that occurs for quite a long time. What I would say is the software you use, and many of you here will use TrueTac, does not have a tool like the tool that the DVSA use for highlighting micro movements yet. So you can't do what they can do, search a data set, a vehicle unit data set, and have it highlight micro movements. You can find them, they are on there, but it's such a forensic thing to do that it would literally take weeks. So there's a disconnect as an operator, as a manager, between what you can do and what they can see when they're looking at your data. That will close, but at the moment there is a disconnect. What does it mean for you? It means just make your drivers aware that movements while they're queuing on the brake mode, if they're waiting and then they start moving forward and they don't change the mode to other work, which is what they'd have to do in that scenario, that could be a false record. It could be very serious. So it's an awareness raising with your drivers, a training with your drivers. There is no currently pragmatic way of you finding it. Okay, if you suspect one at a particular time at a particular location, yeah, you can find it if you get a bit of help. But if you, and that will be relatively quick. But if you were looking for it as a screening of your data, like you do most tachographic visuals, you won't be able to see it. But the DVSA software currently specifically flags it up. It's built in a way that flags it up on the screen and shows them exactly when it's occurred. So you are at a bit of a disadvantage from a management point of view. So what's expected of you is training and education of the drivers and response if something happens that's negative until the software catches up. Okay, so Grant. Now Grant comes from a completely different side, obviously. He comes from the medical side of servicing the transport sector. And we thought we'd bring some very diverse conversation here because there's massive overlaps. But just to explain, historically, most people would think of a doctor getting involved in a driver license renewal at 45 and thereafter. But actually, it's much broader than that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you've got to look at the current regulations. We're in a highly compliance-driven industry that involves everything from the 27-point daily check and so forth on the vehicle. But actually, the regulatory circumstances where that driver has not had a medical assessment for up to 27 years. So you can actually, from the age of 18 to the age of 45, there are no medical requirements through the DVLA, which actually exposes operators, and I'm sure James will touch on the compliance side of things, but you can't presume health until you're not healthy. You have to be able to evidence that you are roadworthy. And so the assumption that just because I've got a medical that's in date and not due for renewal doesn't actually hold water because there's no evidence of driver roadworthiness. And what we're seeing now in the industry is the presumption was that younger drivers coming through were healthier and were replacing and displacing the older drivers exiting the industry. But in actual fact, the younger generation who have had different upbringings and different methods of living and so forth, actually what's probably an obesity-driven problem, actually are not healthier than the exiting older population. And in actual fact, what we're seeing is an onset earlier and earlier of significant diseases like heart disease, diabetes, and sleep apnea at younger and younger ages. So that people are now having, more people are having their heart attack under 40 than ever before. So our presumption that we can just literally fill the vacuum left by an exiting generation with a new incoming cohort is actually a complete myth. It's totally incorrect. So we need to remodel how we appraise health to ensure that we are compliant still.
And that process is thinking about health as one of the risk factors, driver health. And just to illustrate, so there's some of the factors that Grant was talking about there, for example, diabetes or sleep apnea, may be factors that affect over a long period of illness, effectively a long period of deterioration. But even something as simple as this graph, there had to be a graph if there was a scientist involved, okay? But this graph demonstrates quite a simple truth, which is a daily occurrence for many people. Go on, just explain what the graph is showing.
So we see this a lot actually in grey fleet drivers and also in drivers where there's a paucity of services where they actually can't have a toilet break. So they tend to run themselves a bit dry, so they don't hydrate properly. So it's really simple. If you take from this point of view here, you've got optimal performance, optimal hydration, and even when you get to 1%, you're already dropping off. And this is what causes inattention. It's more likely to precipitate fatigue. Distractibility is at a higher incidence. And you only need a handful of percentage dehydration, and already you're starting to hit driver dysfunction. And so physiologically, and one of the backstories to that is the lack of services and so forth. But all this fits into James's narrative about route planning and everything else. But this is actually the product of bad route planning, is that people dehydrate themselves, so your collision risk is higher just because of poor planning.
And one of the things that's coming forward in the legal world, which is why these topics are topical, is that if there is an incident or an accident, then there's a much bigger focus now in the investigatory process on the human factors, i.e. the driver's well-being, their motivation, their attention at the point of the incident, and the extent to which, as a manager or an owner or transport manager, you would have been expected to be aware or pick up on an issue. And this is a direction of travel which is getting more involved as time moves on because of the increasing health awareness within the population that it affects your ability, but also because over time it's obvious that a lot of incidents are caused, and I reckon probably in our case, maybe a quarter of the fatal accidents we deal with, there is a medical issue that impacts that event. And some of them have been very high profile. Think of the Glasgow bin lorry crash, think of the Coventry bus crash not far from here. These are all big incidents where a medical issue was at its heart. So that awareness is within the investigatory bodies, and that ultimately puts a burden on operators to be managing their drivers and raising awareness. So I'll come back to that in a second. But from Caroline's point of view, at the roadside, obviously you're dealing with drivers every day and your colleagues are dealing with drivers every day. What do you see from driver attitude, well-being, fatigue?
So it's really difficult because how many of you that are operators actually ask your drivers about when they want to take their breaks? That's a lot of hands went up then.
Come on, somebody must.
Nobody. So 4.5 hours before you have to have your break. That's the law. That's the limit. It is not a target to hit. You know, different drivers have... I could not drive for 4.5 hours before I had a break. I would not be safe. I couldn't do it. A lot of drivers can't. They need to have their breaks. They may need 2 half-hour breaks. They may need to do the 15 minutes and then the 30 at the end. Yeah. But everybody is different. A driver who needs to take 2 30-minute breaks, so instead of having a 15-minute, then a 30-minute, if that's what they need, it makes them a better driver. It makes them more attentive, more reactive, less likely to have an accident, less likely to get involved. They haven't broken the law if they go to 4.5 hours. But there may be a risk to road safety. There may be a problem. So whilst we're looking at that, what we do find is a lot of people who are tired because they're driving to the limits. So it is trying to say that is your limit. It is not a target for you to hit. And again, as Dr. Grant said, the actual brakes, where are you planning for the drivers to stop? Can they actually get out of their vehicle? Can they have a walk around in the fresh air, just stretch their legs a bit? Or are they literally somewhere where they're stuck in their cab, can't get out, and they never get out the vehicle? So it all helps with the driver being alert, being safer on the road. And what happens then? Do you want to cover walk round now, or should we?
Well, we'll do that in a second. We will do that because the circumstances of the walk round and load security, it's linked, isn't it? We'll do that in a second. But just a quick question. Hands up, how many of you do an annual health assessment with your drivers that they have to complete? Yeah, I reckon about a third. Okay, so from your point of view, where does that put them?
Well, it's great that at least somebody's doing it. what we're seeing now when we do, because we started doing the D4 medicals, but now we do the whole transport-focused occupational health offer. And when we go into places and we look at, first of all, is there a problem? And by doing health screening and annual health checks and what have you, you can do cholesterol and diabetes tests with a simple finger prick and what have you, and also detect heart rhythm problems. But we're seeing more and more diabetes being diagnosed. And also, we're now starting to see, because actually sleep apnea is an easier thing to diagnose. You can actually get a device that you just arrives in the post and you wear it overnight and it diagnoses you by the next morning. And actually the DVLA only have a problem with sleep apnea if it is untreated. So, and in the transport sector, the emerging research looks like about 95% of sleep apnea is undiagnosed because people are reticent about volunteering the difficulty. And what I would say is for fear of losing their license. But what I would say is if you see any driver walking around with a Monster energy drink can in the morning, think about sleep apnea. You don't need that much caffeine if you've had a refreshing night's sleep. And just to bounce back to what James was saying, our research, because we partner with Loughborough University and we're currently doing the world's largest study into driver health. But actually, if your route involves an overnight stop where there is low security for a high security load, for example, the drivers experience very poor sleep, being fearful of load loss and what have you, that actually their incidence of fatigue the next day is very high because they've had very unrestful and broken sleep and fear of being a victim of freight crime. So it's amazing how where you stay for one night will affect, but it's common sense, isn't it? You know, we don't just bounce back, you know, so I think there's a number of touch points there.
Yeah, there is a number of touch points there. And I think in relation to planning the daily rest, how many of you will, those that obviously have drivers that come home every day, this isn't a question for you, but for those that have drivers that stay out, how many plan where they take that daily rest as part of their plan? Half and half. How many half and half? I suppose there'll be a few. A mixed bag. So a lot of it is left to the driver choice and where they prefer to end up. But I think it's well, this is a question where everybody should put their hand up. How many think that there is adequate provision for rest for drivers in the UK? Nobody. Because it's very poor, and it's well known to be very poor, and a lot of work has been done to improve the provision for drivers. But that has a direct effect, for the reasons that Grant has already said, on the ability of the driver to operate the vehicle and equipment safely the following day. And fatigue is actually very difficult to prove as a cause of an accident or a failure, but often within the awareness within the team, it's a suspicion that they have that that's what's gone wrong. And there's also a noticeable deterioration in driver performance towards the end, on telematics, towards the end of their working day. Partly because they're probably more tired, partly because they're wanting to get to the end of their working day. And if you look at the telematic data, those of you that have it, you'll see that there is a pattern of that type. So these are things which get looked at if there is an accident or an incident. It's worth being alive to it. I'll come back in a second, but just from your point of view, there are other aspects of driver welfare. Think about the driver cohort within the UK. It's well known they're getting older. What do we expect them to do every day? A walk round check. What do we expect them to do every day? We expect them to check the security of their load. What's your view of the expectation versus the driver cohort?
Well, this does all come back to planning where you are. So we expect the driver to do a robust walk-round check every time before they use the vehicle. So the top prohibitable item is, I'm sure you can all guess.
You've got to tread carefully.
The tyres. It's been the highest item for at least 10 years. Yet tyres do not go from being legal to cords exposed in one day's journey. If there was a robust walk-round check, they would be picked up. Then you wouldn't get those prohibitions. But that comes back to where the vehicle is, for the driver to be able to do a walk-round check. So is it somewhere where they can actually walk around the vehicle, or is it actually not safe to get out the vehicle, let alone start bending down and looking? Then bending down and looking becomes another issue, because as the drivers get older and we know the health is deteriorating, are they actually physically able to do a robust walk-round check? All of these things all add up to why we are still finding things at the side of the road every single day that should have been picked up by the driver's walk-round checks. This isn't the stuff we're finding with the Hades. We are not expecting drivers to be underneath the vehicle and looking up at the vehicle underneath. What we are expecting is for them to walk round. And in the vast majority of cases, our vehicle examiners, who I will say, yes, they are also in the older generation for a lot of them, they are doing what is in essence a walk-round check of the vehicle to find these things. So with a bit of planning, the driver should be able to find all those things that the vehicle examiner is finding if it was planned where they could stop, if they could get out their vehicle and have a look, whether there is adequate lighting, whether it's on the site or they're provided with some kind of lighting that allows them to have that look if they're starting their journey while it's still dark. So it is all linked to being in the right place to actually do those things safely, because the driver's health is directly linked to actually being able to do that walk-round check, which keeps the vehicle safe, which stops the prohibitions and stops us coming to see you in a bad way.
Okay, so obviously the state of the driver, the fitness of the driver and the health of the driver is relevant from a number of different angles. Now, many of you will be thinking, well, okay, for some drivers, they may get ill within that 27-year period that they have between 18 or 21 or whatever and 45. And then thereafter, there's a regime, isn't there? So every 5 years, drivers get their health checked through this medical process, which some provide a better service than others do. But ignoring that, is 5 years reasonable? What's the sort of medical view on a 5-year interval between health checks?
So if we let the data speak for itself, so there's no opinions here or anything like that, the data will tell you the answer. And by the time you get to 45, in some clinics, we're getting up to 15% of drivers failing for either blood pressure or eyesight or both. Now, the DVLA limit for blood pressure is 180 over 100. Now, if you took that reading to a GP, he'd diagnose you with stage 3 hypertension. You'd already be on multiple treatments and things like that, but the current regulations suggest you can still drive so by the time you fail your medical for blood pressure, you actually are only a few footsteps away from actually having to go to hospital. It's that the limit is that high. And what we're seeing is that, as a general rule, we're seeing that drivers, so talking about the tread on tyres and what have you, blood pressure problems don't happen, the day before your heart attack. These are things that silently develop until they start ramping, until a mission critical or terminal event. So actually, by screening people regularly, you're picking this up, much further in advance, and you're mitigating the risk. And we talk about, health and well-being. In actual fact, we're in risk mitigation and compliance is what we're actually selling here. And health and well-being is the route to risk mitigation and compliance. So usually, not usually, but more often than not, we are seeing that drivers in that 5-year interval, there's a substantial cohort of drivers who are failing their medical. If we look at how bad their blood pressure is when they fail their medical, and we can backcast it that way, a lot of them are failing within 3 years of their last medical. So they're still driving for another 2 years, even though they're actually fundamentally and regulatory, not fit to drive and not roadworthy.
Yeah, so one of the risks from your point of view is that 2-year gap, really, between 3 and 5 years, particularly when they could be seriously ill in reality. What about medication that drivers take? How impacting is that, and how much should operators try and be aware of the medication risk?
Right. Medication is a huge problem, and if you speak to anybody involved in collision investigation, they're very well aware of how much that medication causes or contributes to an accident or a collision being precipitated. Now, when a GP makes a prescription, they may or may not ask the patient, the driver, what do you do for a living? So if that conversation doesn't occur and the driver doesn't volunteer, well, I'm a Group 2, I drive to Group 2 standards, then that doctor can be unwittingly providing medication which is completely undesirable for the safe operation of the vehicle. And in many cases, you may even is a reportable medication to the DVLA. Now, don't forget as well, drivers just, they might take medication for the first time and then go out on the road the same day. And then they're halfway through a route before they realise there's some side effects here, or I can't tolerate this medication. Well, then they're halfway through a route. So what do they want to do? They want to face the issues that developing, or do they want to try and soldier on? So there's multiple factors. So I mean, and in a company like ours, where we literally pretty much all we deal is the transport industry, medication causes so many problems. You've got to understand exactly what it is your drivers are taking and look it up and work out whether it's reportable and what effect that does have on their safe operation. Because an accident arising from that, there's no defence for just saying, well, I thought it would be fine.
Yeah, for the driver and potentially for you as the operator as well. Now, in terms of operator awareness, I mean, I wouldn't have a clue. I mean, I know that some opioids have some risk of drowsiness and what have you, but or distraction, but I wouldn't have a clue really, one from the other. Where do you go as a manager to find out whether a particular drug should be reported?
Yeah, so the DVLA, with their fitness to drive, does have guidance on certain domains of medication. And it's all very well and good, the diabetic medication may be much better understood. But I mean, there is a lot of medication given out in the UK every year. And it's not just that, it's just that they also be aware that some interactions can cause some very adverse events, which can actually, you have two innocent prescriptions, and in combination, they cause a reaction which is completely intolerable and totally incompatible with driving.
So from the point of view of you advising operators on there how to manage the medical risk of drivers, one of the essential steps is find out if they're taking medication and check for yourself.
Yeah, and that comes in with the annual health check, because actually people start taking medication without necessarily linking that with a need to report it to to their employer or indeed the DVLA. So the annual health check, which can just start as something as basic as a questionnaire, we can see what medication they're on, and we can give a professional advisory opinion on whether that's compatible with driving or not.
And I think that in many ways that solution of doing regular checks is a critical part of the process from an employer point of view. And this is probably one in the big accident cases and I referred to two of them. In both cases, they had a common theme. The condition that the driver was suffering from was known by at least somebody else who had been involved in the transport sector prior to the accident. I'm not going to go into the detail beyond that, but that is the position. And yet, at the time of the accident, the impact of the condition had not been appreciated by the employer in that moment. Now, there might be a piece there for doctors to start being more communicative with the DVLA, at least, in relation to these issues, because the burden in some ways shouldn't just rest on unprofessional when it comes to medically trained, non-medically trained operators. But the law is that you're vicariously liable for your drivers. And if you are aware they're taking medication and 2 or 3 people have died as a result of some catastrophic failure in that driver's health, then the question will come back to you as the operator in the modern world. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. In 2025 and going forward, they're going to be asking you, what did you know? What did you do to find out? How is it that driver was behind that wheel with that condition? So it's quite a major part of an investigation now, and therefore the expectation on you builds accordingly. It's not rocket science, though. Let's have a look at what would you say a competent system would look like to managing driver health?
Okay, so and this doesn't have to cost the earth either. It's got to be easy. It's got to be something you can actually engage with. So if you have an annual health check questionnaire, but actually you might do screening, as in actually testing people for cholesterol and diabetes every other year or something like that. But actually you've got to drill down, if you're going to put your money on anything, if you're starting to see the data showing a problem with a particular driver, they've had near misses, collisions, they're not attending work, their productivity's down. You've got to ask yourself the question with some maturity and say there must be, let's assume there's a medical problem until we prove otherwise. Because there's a really good chance that if they're not performing and they don't look terribly well, then they probably have got something wrong with them. So you actually could double down on individuals as well as looking at your wider cohort.
And in terms of using medical professionals for occupational health reasons,
Yep.
for example, some of you will have done that. Your businesses will have an established relationship with an occ health supplier. Others may never have done it. How does that work in your experience if somebody wants to get that kind of interventional assessment of a driver?
Yeah, so if you put occupational health into a search engine,
Yeah.
you'll have loads of people who are trying to sell you hearing tests and all this sort of stuff, which you just don't need. So, I mean, at an entry level, we offer a pay-as-you-go service where if you've got a problem with, say, one driver and their attendance or absence rate, you can ask and commission one small piece of work without having to commission any subscription services or other things that you probably won't need in the transport sector.
Yeah.
So you've got a question there.
Well, good on you, Karen.
Oh yeah, occupational health. Normally, you get your driver. He agrees to go to occupational health, and he has a big review with occupational health. But at the end of the day, occupational health will not in favour of the driver, but will tell you exactly how the driver feels he's capable of achieving a certain process. So
Yeah.
for you, it's difficult if you don't believe that that driver is capable because of what he's on. Occupational health will only sort of interview the driver and give you his viewpoint of whether he's capable or not. So if you decide with occupational health that the driver isn't capable, but DVLA still give him his licenses, then you're in a really difficult situation.
Okay, so well, let's get you a decent, better occupational health offer, because what we find is we are primarily a doctor-led service. So that requires us to actually think critically and challenge what we're not just blindly adopt. We're not the mouthpiece. So that's why we don't use a nurse-led organisation where you tend to get much more of the employee advocate role. So that's what we've experienced. That's why we preferred the doctor, because you can actually challenge people. You can say, well, they say, well, I can't sit. So, well, you've been sitting for the length of this consultation, so we know you can sit. You know, for example. So the DVLA may give them a lot, so they're within the regulatory framework, which is this large box, but actually being fit to drive on a given day or in a given period of time, you might still be within the regulatory framework, but actual functionally in terms of discharging your ability to safely operate a vehicle, you can say you're not fit to fulfill that contractual matter.
Yeah, I think that it's actually quite a big issue, this issue there of the challenge between what you get back from, say, a doctor or from occupational health, sometimes what the driver's telling you their doctor's said as well, or what they're telling you they've said to the doctor, which may not be exactly what's being said, and how much confidence you can have in allowing those people to keep driving. And I think it's important to recognise that in the end, you're liable. You know, the responsibility stops with you. And if you're genuinely worried about it, then you might want to look at a different supplier, one that's perhaps more advanced technically, or you might want to look at getting some advice on the question. You know, actually, I don't feel comfortable for these reasons. I think they present a risk. Their behaviour, the way they are, you know, looks vacant, looks less focused, doesn't seem to be on the ball. They're not doing anything about it. What do I do? Well, obviously, normally we would say refer to occupational health and suspend from driving in the meantime on pay. But ultimately, if they refuse to cooperate with that process, then you're going down the route of saying, look, I can't have you driving my vehicles. We started to come to the end of our employment relationship. So in the end, you've got to, you know, you are that gatekeeper for your own safety. You know, don't put yourself on a hook to get someone else off it. It's absolutely common, unfortunately. Some of the cases that we've dealt with which involve driver issues, though, can actually involve more minor issues, issues associated with, for example, just inattention. I'm dealing with a very serious accident involving a low bridge at the moment, where the driver was on a service route, so he was on a specific designated route, and he drove off route under a bridge, which is forbidden. They're not allowed in any vehicle of this company to drive under that bridge. And he's worked for the company for years, he's well knows. And he cannot answer why it was that at that time he did that. And that response to a bridge strike is extremely common. They've no idea why they've got themselves into that position. So when you're looking at driver health, there's two measures. There's this long-term issue where you might refer to occupational health, you might become aware of something in a questionnaire, or from colleagues who might say, look, I don't think, he falls asleep at 2 o'clock in the afternoon for an hour. I think there's a problem. On the one hand, on the other hand, there is on any given day, is there a reason why a particular driver shouldn't be driving? And this is an issue which is really common in the context of things like bridge strikes. It's weird because there's been such a focus on bridge strikes. We're probably doing a couple of hundred a year through our business as lawyers, and nearly all of them have some sort of issue with the driver's attention span at that point, focus on the job. And if you drill down, they might be going on holiday the next day. It doesn't have to be a negative event, but equally, in a particularly sad case, following the death of a child, a driver was basically breaching the driver's hours rules because he didn't want to stop. Because when he stopped, he was thinking about this loss. It was 6 months earlier, not that long in the scale of something so grievous. And it came to a head in a hearing, and he wouldn't tell the traffic commissioner about this. He didn't want to explain because he said, "I'll get upset." So I said to him, "Look, the traffic commissioner has got to know what happened here." So I said to him, I'll go and see the traffic commissioner before the hearing, explain it, ask them not to tackle you directly on it. If you're happy with me doing that, you can't offer up information if your client doesn't want. And he said, well, okay, but I do not want it referring to in the hearing because I'll get upset, which I, completely understand. And the traffic commissioner dealt with it well. I explained it to her. And then when the driver was there, she said to him, look, she said, I'm going to tell you this now. She said, you've got to focus on the job when you're a driver and you've got to take your breaks because if you don't, somebody else is going to be where you are, and you'll be responsible for that. And he said, I get it. Just like that, I get it. So it's very interesting that with the right intervention, not always medical, but with the right intervention, you can say to people, look, right now you shouldn't be driving. You're distracted by a divorce, you're distracted by a death in the family, or you're distracted because you're giddy over, winning the lottery. You wouldn't be driving anyway, would you? Maybe some would, let's be fair. But whatever the distraction is, if you're distracted and you're driving an articulated combination, or you're operating a HIAB or other equipment, tippers and what have you, it's dangerous. So one of the areas of focus at the moment is this area of what they call human factor. You've got all the equipment fitted to your vehicles imaginable, you've got alerts for bridges, you've got route mapping, you've got, you name it, you've got it. And yet they still go wrong, they still have accidents, they still go on diversions, they still get it wrong. So when you're looking at that breadth of thing, what you're left with, well, what are we left with? You're left with the driver, you're back to the Mark 1 eyeball in the cab, aren't you? What work do you know? You're working with Loughborough University on health generally that deals with that issue.
Yes, I think there's only about 6% of actual collisions are down to a problem identified of vehicular origin. All the rest of it is entirely human error or lack of performance. And actually, you've got to be able to have quite rapid cognitive skills to be able to decision make, particularly if there's a road closure or some departure from the planned route. And actually, if you're not on your game through whatever reason, distraction, fatigue, underlying diagnosed or undiagnosed medical condition, you actually need these drivers to think more like athletically, but I'm afraid their method of working is quite to the contrary, isn't it? Yeah. So we're certainly seeing that people have assumed that it's an easy job, and it's not. It's getting harder, and therefore to actually support the cognitive decision making and the speed of decision making and correct decision making, you need fit people, and it's a given. The research says that the worse the health of the driver, the higher the likelihood of the collision and the higher the likelihood of a bad collision. So health is directly linked to collision risk.
Just a slight pivot of subject, bring Caroline back into this, just from the point of view of how many people here run a business that benefits from earned recognition? Anybody? Nobody? Oh, that's good. How many people fancy earned recognition? Are going for it, want to get there in the end? Yeah, 1, 2, not very many at the moment then. Well, look, it's worth seriously looking at it. That's a topic for another day. Absolutely. But one of the key benefits of earned recognition is the nature of the relationship with the regulatory body that is the DVSA, and indeed it filters through into the nature of the relationship with the Traffic Commissioner in a little bit more of an indirect way. But if there's an issue, so you have a problem, you get a prohibition, even an S-mark prohibition in a bad situation, there's a conversation, isn't there? That's how it works. And many people have said to me, look, granted, I'm not benefiting from earned recognition. I haven't got the digitisation. I haven't got the systems that they expect. But I think I'm pretty good. And if there's an issue, I would like a dialogue that's adult to adult, as I call it, rather than a big stick and you're going to see the Traffic Commissioner. What's the DVSA's attitude to operators in that context?
Well, I'm sure some of you will give me some incident where you had an examiner and they didn't behave in the way that we would perhaps want them to. We've got a few hundred and they're all over the country. There's always going to be somebody. But on the whole, we have a positive relationship. When we go out to see an operator, we are just fact-finding. The issue comes when people don't want to engage, and that fact-finding, instead of just going and being a conversation, becomes a bit of a battle. You're trying to find out what's gone on. People are reluctant to engage with you. They're reluctant to have you in the office. They're reluctant to actually share any information. That is the big difference we have with earned recognition. Earned recognition operators share their data with us every single month, so we can actually see what's going on and we can have that adult conversation, which is quite positive. So things do go wrong, but we know we can have a trusted conversation with them and get to the bottom of it. Where people aren't in earned recognition, it becomes, I'm sure there is a dread around, oh no, DVSA are here, and people are trying not to tell us things, trying not to share things. But this all comes down to the conversation. When the examiner goes, their report will go to the Traffic Commissioner. Whether it's an MIVR or whether it's a TVR, that report goes into the Traffic Commissioner. Does that make people reluctant to talk to us openly? Yeah. It might do. People might think, oh no, whatever I tell them is going to the Traffic Commissioner. But this goes back to everything else. Unless you have the conversation with us, unless you're open with us and tell us exactly what's happened, we will do the digging and we will have to make an assessment. And if you turn up, having employed a fabulous solicitor to represent you at that PI hearing, the Traffic Commissioner is going to be questioning, well, if there was nothing wrong, why on earth didn't you tell the examiner at the time? It makes our job a lot easier if people engage, if they're open and honest. If you've got something to hide, we will find it. But it's always better if you actually tell us what's going on and we can actually work with you to help you get things right. Part of our role is education. It's not just about that hard-edged enforcement. We are here as well to help you get things right. If you've got challenges, we will help you be able to put in processes. We will be able to help you look at the things that you need to be focused on. But if you don't tell us, there's nothing we can do.
So what if somebody says, listening to this, well, earned recognition sounds attractive, but I'm a sort of 20 vehicle operator. Is it even available to me? How does it work now? What are you looking for in earned recognition, and how relatively, what's the process?
Right, earned recognition is available to everybody. So we have some operators with a few hundred vehicles. We have some single vehicle operators in earned recognition. It is free to join. The only thing you have to do is have your 2-yearly audit to get in. You have to have a compliance history. You can't be the worst of the worst in getting earned recognition. We have standards to maintain. It is what it says on the tin. You have earned recognition for your compliance, and therefore we have a very different relationship with you to what we do with other people. You will send your KPIs, so KPIs as to how much can go wrong. We do not expect everything to be 100%. We know that when you're looking at transport, things go wrong. Things go wrong with vehicles, they go wrong with drivers, they go wrong with routes. So there will always be things that go wrong. we are reasonable people. I know it may be hard to believe, we are reasonable people. And we will look at all of those things. But again, it is very much that conversation. So if you've got any breaches, the earned recognition team contact you and there's a conversation about it. What happened? Has something gone wrong? Have your system started to fail? Well, let's put it right. Or no, this is what it was. And that's absolutely fine because we can't foresee everything. So it is available to everybody. It is recognised by traffic commissioners as being a scheme. So some of the schemes that you can join, sorry, I'll do a little sales pitch. Some of the schemes that you can join, you pay for an audit and you pay for membership and that's it. It goes no further. Earned recognition scheme is the only scheme that ensures continuing compliance because every month we check that the compliance levels are remaining. And we are busy talking to the local councils, local authorities about getting this as a contracting standard because these are the vehicles that are safe. Why would you go cheap when you could go safe? Life is far more valuable. So trying to get people to recognise this as a compliance standard that demonstrates every single month that operators are being compliant. Fabulous team over there. You'll see them in the turquoise blue gilets. Please go and talk to them. They'd love to talk to you. There are leaflets on your chairs.
A couple more points just to make. How many people here have read the latest version of the Guide to Maintaining Roadworthiness? Oh, a good number actually. Good on you. Well, be aware that there's a new one probably coming out in April. It's currently earmarked for April. When it comes out, it's going to include a workshop assessment tool, which is designed to help you choose, if you use external maintenance, competent suppliers, basically. And they're graded between 1 and 5 stars, I think it is. It's quite good. I've seen an early draft of it. I don't think it'll move between the one I've seen and the final one, so I can't share that with you. But what it's important for you to understand is, once that comes in, if you're not using one that's been assessed and you haven't assessed them yourself against the same criteria, then you're going to be in a weak position if your maintenance is failing. On the other hand, if you are using a competent assessed garage and they let you down in some way, like on an MOT presentation or something like that, you've got the positive side of that, which is, look, they're a 3-star or a 4-star supplier on your accreditation scheme, and some of the higher stars they'll have to pay for an audit to achieve. And you'll be able to benefit from that. So it's a new scheme that's coming in. There's quite a big focus on it in the new guide when it comes out. I haven't seen the new guide, but I'm told that's the position. For those of you who are aware of Backhouse-Jones, you'll know we do a free webinar every second Friday. There's one this Friday. In fact, Grant is on it, which is why he stood in today, which is I'm very grateful for. And if you're not familiar with it, if you look at backhousejones.co.uk, sign up. It's completely free. It's a radio format. It's discussion like this, but with a lot of questions coming in from the audience. And hopefully people find it entertaining. We get between 200 and 300 people listening live and about double that who listen again, including the 200. So it doubles with people who listen again, between about 500 and 700 people. So if you fancy that, it's completely free. You sign up on backhousejones.co.uk, look up free webinar. And we do occasionally get some DVSA guests on. We've had everybody under the sun on, as well as people from our team. So if you're interested, by all means, have a look at that. Has anybody got any questions on anything medical or DVSA related? Yeah, go on. Oh yeah, wait for the microphone. Thanks, Caroline.
Question about when you mentioned the sleep apnea mask and the finger pricking test. Is that not a bit of a HR hot potato where you're saying you've got to do that? Is there a conflict there? I mean, we can't really say you have to do it, can we?
Well, you can, because if a driver is diagnosed as suffering from sleep apnea by a medical professional, then they will have their license removed from them, the Cat D or Cat C, depending which you are, until they have satisfied the medical professional that they are treating the sleep apnea. And I think it's their blood oxygen that's measured. Anyway, there are some measurements that are taken to assess that they're actually using the equipment that's been provided, and then they are monitored over time. It's fairly low intervention. It's not an intense thing. I'm answering your question here. But otherwise, they can't drive. That's the point legally.
So we're not going to end up in some ACAS tribunal or something like that, no.
If they've got
Thank you, Caroline, for confirming. Sorry, John. About the local, I've got one operator who came out of PI a year ago. He was on a restricted. Miss Bell put him up to a standard, which is why I'm in. And he's losing business now because the way his industry works is in wholesale fruit and veg. It gets to a point where somebody competes against him and then he just simply can't do it. So the reason we're going into earned recognition is because I've said, well, hang on a minute. If we get earned recognition and your contracts with schools, prisons and hospitals, and a lot of the skills are local authority driven in terms of the decision making, being earned recognition moves it away from being on price onto the safety element of not knocking over children or patients at hospitals. Yeah. Okay, and I'm pleased that you confirmed that you're speaking to local authorities, because that's what I'm telling him. And he says, what's it going to cost? I said, well, probably a couple of grand for an audit. You know what I mean? Happy days. Thank you.
So there's an advocate for earned recognition. Get your fruit and veg. But it's right. I mean, that's the whole point. The point is it should reduce the stress on you as an operator. Has anybody got any other questions? Yeah, go on. Sorry, I'll do the mic if you want.
You'd have to lean in because yours is on your
Well, it is. Yeah.
Might be a bit of a strange question. I have been part of a DVSA audit, to be honest, and I found that the DVSA officers were outstanding, and all it did was make me a better operator at the end of the meeting that they portrayed, because he educated me. But one of the things that I found in the companies that I've worked for, there seems to be a misconception on the PMI status. So a PMI status for say 6 weeks is 42 days. But then when it goes on to 10 weeks and 12 weeks, you can fall foul of a DVSA audit if you don't calculate them as 70 days and 84 days. Because what happens is the DVSA will not do you, my apologies, but will identify anything over 86 days, say,
well, no,
on a
it doesn't,
12-week cycle.
Right.
And there's a misconception in industry that the weeks are weeks, but you can fall foul of going into week 11 or week 13.
Right, that's the point.
Yeah.
That's a slightly different point, okay. What they've done is they used to be strictly 42 days. So if it was a Tuesday, it had to be 42 days later, which would probably be a Wednesday or a Monday. But either way, it had to be directly 42 days later. Now what they did, some years ago now, they moved to the ISO week. The ISO is the International Standards Organization. Does anybody want to guess what they said a week was? Midnight Sunday to midnight Sunday. So it's pretty well known. So if you're in an ISO week, so you're programmed for 6 weeks, the ISO week, Monday to Sunday that week, any day in that week is okay. That counts as 6 weeks, even though it's almost 7, because the first one was on a Monday and the last one was on a Sunday, for example. That would still be fine and you'd pass. The spreadsheet is designed, that they use, is designed to deal with that. But if 6 weeks, the first one was done on a Sunday, and then the next one was done the following Monday, which is 1 day later, you're in the next ISO week, you're non-compliant, if you follow me. No, they don't anymore. They put days in the paragraph at the top, but they use something called a SIPCAT, which is a very complicated spreadsheet. It's actually quite a clever little spreadsheet somebody's come up with, and that shouldn't do that now.
My friend who's part of was inspected last September.
They said it was 42.
They were on a 10-week cycle, and they were identified as 73 days and 74 days because they accepted that 48 days, so 70 days, and then they accepted anything 2 days over the 70 days, but anything over that, they had to be a justification as to why. It
might be because they flipped over Sunday. If they flipped over Sunday, that's correct. If they're still within the same ISO week, that's incorrect. Because you should theoretically do it earlier next time. You know, that's how it should work. Any other questions, medical or otherwise?
But can I just say thank you for the positive comments about our examiners?
Well, actually, that experience of operators who have a brush with the law, and we're even quite serious. You know, a lot of operators go wrong because they've been operating the same way for 15, 20, 30 years, and they're very comfortable with the way it runs. And then the DVSA, something happens, a driver defect's picked up at the roadside, they get an S-mark prohibition, in come the inspectors, they do a maintenance investigation visit, which these days is really thorough, and out of that visit they come up with a load of recommendations and criticisms. And they realise basically that they're basing their understanding on what they've done for 25 years, which seems to have worked perfectly well until this driver on this morning, when in reality the expectation in the guide, which is why I asked the question about the guide, has moved massively in that time period. So, and they see it as a benefit. They realise they're to engage with events like this, to learn more from the trade associations if they're members of them, and to engage with other sort of material and information, and particularly as transport managers to do refresher training, which most transport managers are expected to do at a minimum 2 days every 5 years. That is, if you think about it, that is a really low bar. 5 years ago, we had COVID almost to the day. It started the lockdown period. Before that, 5 years ago now, if you'd done a course, you wouldn't have covered the 10-year-old tyre thing. You wouldn't have covered the change in tachograph record-keeping rules that came in 2020, but weren't enforced until 2022, and there was no literature on it at that time. You wouldn't have covered numerous other changes. The brake testing thing has changed twice in that period, numerous other changes. So 5 years is too long. It's important to read the documentation when it comes out. There's a massive free resource on the .gov.uk website. And like I said, we offer a free webinar where we will try and make you aware of this stuff, and very contemporaneously to the change. And by all means, sign up to that. So, but keep up to date. That's the key reason why people get into trouble who are otherwise good operators. They just miss something.
69 years old, who in this same operation, who had suspected had bad eyesight. He'd gone to the optician, come back. 6 weeks ago, he took an eyesight test on the Snellen chart. He couldn't reel off line 5 or line 6, and he could do Shakespearean sonnet on line 7. Yeah, so obviously he'd memorised line 7. Yeah, obviously I suspended him immediately. Well, I actually disqualified him immediately as far as we were concerned. Should I notify the traffic commissioner?
That he's driving when he's failed an eye test? No, it's a DVLA issue. And what he needs to do is to be suspended from working for you until he goes to an optician for an eye test. Well, if he's not doing it, he can't drive. Well, normally his entitlement would be qualified by the condition that he has to wear glasses. If he doesn't, it invalidates his insurance and yours. So he must wear lenses. I wear lenses for driving. I wouldn't be able to drive safely without wearing lenses. I mean, these days it's a function of age, isn't it? I mean, how much eye test stuff do you see? And I mean, you're not an optician, but it must be.
But I was seeing a couple of things actually. Eye tests are a really easy thing for drivers to fail. By the time they're 45 years of age, a lot of drivers have bought the ready readers from the newsstand. Yeah,
no, they're not.
And they're relying on those to pass an eye test. The other thing is that we're seeing that as people get older, eye health is a problem. Diabetes and glaucoma, these are more rife in the industry than people realise. I mean, you've got to remember that when the DVLA D4 medical was when that form came out, I mean, the iPhone has been invented since the DVLA invented the D4 medical. The D4 medical has hardly changed, and yet we're on version 16 of the iPhone. Yeah. So you can just see how far behind it has fallen, and that the world has moved on, and that the method for assessing medically driver fitness just hasn't.
It's just out of date. All right, I think we'll draw it to a close then, unless anybody's got a pressing question. Can we say thanks very much to our guests for offering up today?